Hey, good evening, everyone. This is the Economic and Community Development Committee of the Common Council, meeting today, July 7th, and we're going to call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Do a brief roll call. We have Mr. Kubelman, Mr. Livingston, Ms. Shanahan, Ms. Young, and myself, John Kites, are all present. Next up is public participation. Sabrina, do we have anyone signed up to or on the call to speak?
We have two people. So Diane Loricella raised her hand first. Diane, you should be allowed to unmute yourself now.
And if you call, just keep your comments under 3 minutes. That would be great. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Common Council and staff. My name is Diane Loricella, and I just wanted to comment on one of your items on the agenda tonight. Well, two items actually, related to the Public Act 21-29. The first has to do with asking to opt out for the section relating to modifying parking regulations for accessory dwellings. And as I said in the Planning and Zoning public hearing recently held, they had a public hearing about the opting out, which of course you were forwarded their decision making. I have no problem with modifying the parking requirements, but what I do have an issue with is the second item on the agenda relating to ADUs or accessory dwelling units, and a request that this committee vote to send this particular item to the full council and vote yes and vote to opt out and agree with the Planning and Zoning Commission. I ask that you go back, that you put this particular vote on hold unless and until such time that the Planning and Zoning Commission better explains their reasons for why they needed to opt out on both of these items, but especially their reasoning related to the drafting of new regulations. The prologue, and I hope everyone, before you vote on opting out, I implore this council to read the draft regulations for accessory dwelling units, because there is a reason why since 1984, there have only been approximately 259 accessory permits built. It's because of the very, very overly restrictive regulations. Now, I do agree with, and I'm happy that the commission and the staff and the city, in essence, has a great prologue with ideas about how they embrace and agree with the intent of 21-29 in the section relating to ADUs. However, as we know, the devil is sometimes in the details, and the details are eyebrow raising. And I believe that the intent of this council and the fact that you have an ad hoc affordable housing committee, which I am very pleased about, I ask that you put this vote on hold until that committee weighs in and takes a look at the draft regulations, because not only are they overly restrictive, I think that once again, with the intention said in the prologue, Mr. Chairman and commission and council members, that they want to increase the tools in the toolbox for affordable housing. When you read the details on the restrictions, especially the size, and also the fact that they are restricting any attached or detached units to only the side and backyards and not the front yards, I think is myopic, because some homes have their front entrance in the back. And I think we should do a site-by-site evaluation and not be so restrictive, which is the intent of Public Act 21-29 and enabling legislation. I think our city, even though we have achieved, I think 13.5% recently looked at for affordability, it's not truly affordable. And I think because of the size of our city and the fact that we have a lot of seniors and young people that would like to remain in the city, I implore this council to put this on hold, look at the entire draft, but also possibly even wait for the draft to be finished and voted on. They have to have a public hearing. At the very least, if this committee does decide to vote yes to opt out, could you please add an attached request that as soon as possible, that the Planning and Zoning Commission of our city have a public hearing and quickly put together less restrictive, but still increases standards for ADUs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Larcella. Sabrina, has anyone else signed up or have their hand raised?
Yes, we have Mr. Tanner Thompson. Tanner, you should be allowed to unmute yourself.
Excellent. Am I coming through?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Council members, thanks for the opportunity to address you today. I am here also to speak on the same topic that Ms. Larcella has spoken on, and that is the ADU regulations. I want to echo the sentiment and the pretty well-established idea that we're in a housing crisis right now, and that we need to do basically everything we can to make it possible to build more housing, especially housing that fits within the community, that fills in already developed places, as opposed to encouraging more sprawl. ADUs are a great way to do this. Obviously, there's lots of different things that we need to do. There's lots of different kinds of that missing middle housing that we need to be encouraging, like townhomes, like duplexes, fourplexes, etc. But ADUs are a very elegant way to do that. Desegregate Connecticut, as I'm sure a lot of you know, has done good work in getting the statewide bill passed, and did a lot of due diligence in terms of coming up with regulations that would work across the state. And I think that's what we have here. I've reviewed the meetings of the Planning and Zoning Commission where this was discussed, and there are some reasonable points brought up about why Norwalk might want this to be more flexible for Norwalk specifically, and that would require opting out of the state law. I think that there are reasonable arguments to be made there, but I want to stress that when the Planning and Zoning Commission voted to put this in front of the Common Council, they did so with the intent that essentially the Common Council would be making the value judgment about whether opting out would be more beneficial than remaining with the statewide ordinance. I want to make one point about the statewide ordinance in favor of actually staying opted into that, and that is that one way that we can make it easier for this housing to be built is for the regulations to be streamlined, right? So that different cities across the state have the same regulations. That allows developers who are going to come in and build ADUs on individual property owners' lots. They can do that more easily if the regulation is streamlined across the state, which if cities and towns stay opted in, that will be the case. Obviously, there is also value in opting out so that we can stay more flexible. But I do want to point out that every single change, every single dimension along which the Planning and Zoning Commission wants to be flexible is a dimension along which it would make it harder for ADUs to be built. It would make it more restrictive. And I think that we need to remove as many of those restrictions as possible. So if we do in fact opt out, I would encourage the Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission to opt out, but then to adopt all of the same regulations that exist at the state level currently with this new bill. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have one more with their hand raised. It's Rich Bonifant. Rich, you should be allowed to unmute yourself right now.
Good evening. Rich Bonifant, 17 Park Hill Avenue, and I'm just smiling because I like all of you, all right? But hey, unlike the last two speakers, I'm not a big fan of jamming as much density into the town of Norwalk that you possibly can. So I'm not too keen on like shortening the parking requirements, because people do want cars and to be fighting for spaces all over the side streets. But that, look, I just want to make one point. I've been reading this thing here, and I just want to catch this while you're still in committee and not at the last minute at the council meeting where things are too late. I like the part on the accessory dwellings that the owner of the property must reside on the premises. I like that. The only thing I gotta, you guys been through this before, that you gotta figure out the remedy before you finalize this whole thing. What's the remedy when the owner doesn't live on the property and he's renting out the front end and the back end? You need to, I mean, what happens? Do you throw both tenants out? Do you demolish the unit? Do you fine them $100 a day for not complying with your rule? I mean, I'm just saying, before you don't want to kick the can down too far down the road and not have to, and not know what to do later on. And that's all I'm going to say. And the state is a little confusing when they say you need 2/3 votes. I mean, I've been through it with you guys. That what's a 2/3? Is it 2/3 of who showed up? Is it 2/3 of your body? Whether you need 10 votes on the council, or whether or not half the people didn't show up on vacation. Figure out what that 2/3 vote is, because I couldn't be clear on that from what I read. Other than that, good luck with all you're doing, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Mr. Bonifant. Anyone else, Sabrina?
There isn't anyone else. However, I did receive one written comment that I provided to you all in email, and that has been provided to our notes taker. But I would be happy to read it if you want me to into the record. If not, it's already been submitted.
No, I think we've all received it, unless anyone on the committee feels differently. I know we've all received it and read it. As long as it's put into the minutes, I'm fine with not having it read. Anyone have any alternate opinions? No? Okay. All right, we will close public participation and move on to item 1. That's the approval of the minutes of June 2nd, 2022. Someone like to move those minutes? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. All in favor, please raise their hand and signify yes. Abstentions? Let the record show Ms. Shanahan has abstained, and the minutes pass. Okay, moving on to new business under planning and zoning, and that's item 1, authorize Mayor Harry W. Rilling to execute all documentation and or resolutions associated with the city of Norwalk's opt-out of the state of Connecticut parking provision of Public Act number 2129 through 29, HB 6107. Mr. Baker, will you be speaking to this item?
I will.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'll pull up my memo that you should have received. I guess we're starting with parking. So the state last June passed Public Act 2129, which kind of put a couple new mandates in for cities to opt in or opt out of. So the first one we'll do is parking. So essentially what the state said was that for multifamily development, they put a parking cap on how many parking spaces you can require. So it's 2 spaces per 2-bedroom or more unit and 1 space per 1-bedroom or studio unit. So right now, we kind of already do that. Our parking standard is 1.3 parking spaces per unit, regardless of bedroom size. And then what we do, or number of bedrooms, excuse me. And then what we do is we actually allow you to reduce your parking down to 1 space per unit, provided that you pay a fee to our affordable housing fund. So what we did was we looked at some recent developments in Norwalk and kind of compared what we required for parking and then what the state cap would have required for parking. And it kind of came out to a mixed result. So developments that had more studios and 1-bedroom units usually benefited under the state legislation more than the existing zoning regulations. And then the developments that had more higher number of 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom units benefited under our current zoning regulations more than the state legislation. And then if you factor in that most developments have typically been taking advantage of our workforce housing reduction in parking and paying the fee, that actually works out best. That provides the least amount of parking regardless. So provided that we're currently rewriting our entire zoning regs, we're not sure that, I guess right now we're a little concerned that if we maintain the existing state legislation, that more developments can take advantage of the, one space per unit and then not pay into our affordable housing fee. And then we're losing out on those funds, which are, supposed to go to helping developers or the city construct additional affordable housing. So we are asking that the council consider opting out of this legislation. Planning and Zoning Commission has agreed, and that's why it's before you tonight.
Brian, you have any information on other communities in our area that have chosen to opt out or chosen to stay in?
As far as I know, most are opting out. Norwalk has some of the, I guess, more liberal parking standards. So, if you go to some of our surrounding neighboring towns, they have, 2 parking spaces per unit as it is. So we're a little bit, we require less parking than they do. So as far as I know, most are opting out. Take that for what it's worth.
Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, thank you. Brian, I'm going to support this. I just want to talk a little bit about your timing and the approach of the P&Z Commission, given you're looking at everything now. Everything I read suggests that we should go to a lower number in the urban area. Are you guys considering changing what you proposed here, or just sort of want to accept?
So with the reg rewrite right now, the draft is coming out later this month, so hopefully everyone will get a chance to take a peek. But the current proposal is to completely eliminate parking requirements on Washington Street and Wall Street, with the idea that you have pretty much all these historic structures with nowhere to actually provide additional parking. So those two we're looking at removing parking requirements. And then as you're in the urban core, we're also looking at proximity to train stations for additional reductions. So you might see near the Sono train station, parking requirements go even further down.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, historic buildings is one of the things I've heard a lot about. Otherwise, you force people to tear them down.
Right.
Right. So anyway, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, any overlap with the TOD project by the train station? Will this affect the LDA? Maybe this is a Jessica or Brian question, but just saying this is all coinciding.
So with, I guess it kind of depends on timing. Currently, when the application comes in, whatever zoning regulations are in place or what they'll have to comply with as far as parking. I'm not sure if Jessica has anything else.
I think that we are looking to bring the LDA to you sooner than the zoning will be passed. So I would imagine that the current zoning stays in place. And we also have worked with Spinnaker on that LDA to be able to meet the parking that's currently in place. So that is the basis of the conversation that we've had with them to date.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, would someone like to move this item? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. Unanimous. Okay, moving on to the second piece of this puzzle, and that's item 2, authorize Mayor Harry W. Rilling to execute all documentation and or resolutions associated with the City of Norwalk's opt-out of the State of Connecticut accessory dwelling unit provisions of Public Act number 21-29 HB 6107. Would someone like to move this? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. You're up again, Brian.
Sure. So this one I think is a little bit more interesting than parking. So I'll reshare my screen. Okay, so same bill as the parking, House Bill 6107 or Public Act 21-29. Changed some of the zoning standards and Connecticut general statutes, which essentially put 6 new standards that cities either can opt into or opt out of. So the first is designating zones where you'll allow ADUs, and the big change is that they have to be detached or attached, depending on what the property owner prefers. The next one is setting a minimum floor areas or maximum floor areas, excuse me, of 30% of the principal dwelling or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less. The fourth is setbacks that are the same as the principal dwelling. Fifth is height, landscaping, and architectural standards that do not exceed that of a single family residence. Essentially saying if you don't have architectural standards for someone who wants to build a single family house, you can't put architectural standards on an ADU. And then the last are kind of some more building code-ish requirements. And then just really the only one important one for us, I guess, is the periodic renewals for ADUs. So I guess I can kind of go into where we stand now and kind of what we're envisioning going forward. So let's see here. So we made the recommendation that we opt out. Again, we agree, staff agrees with pretty much 99% of what the state has put out there. There's really just a couple of things that we were concerned about. And it really comes down to maximum size of the ADUs, the height, and then kind of any sort of architectural standards and possibly periodic renewals. So in terms of maximum size, the state again did 1,000 square feet of the house or 30%, whichever is less. The existing standard right now is 700 square feet for an ADU max size, and the Planning and Zoning Commission said we think we should stick with that. So in our draft regulations, we went ahead and put in a maximum size of 700 square feet. We kind of got rid of the 30% minimum requirement or minimum because that penalizes smaller homeowners. So if you say you have 1,000 square foot home now and you want to build an ADU on your property, under the state legislation, you can only build a 300 square foot one. We say, why not just let them do a 700 square foot one as well? For setbacks, the only issue we had, I know Ms. Lorchella said that the plan wasn't to allow them in the front property or front yard. We proposed that you can if it's attached, but for detached, we would prefer that it's not constructed in front of your house. We put a standard in that it's located no closer to your front property line than your existing single family house, with the idea that we don't let you build a garage, detached garage in front of your house. We don't let you build a shed in your front property, front yard setback. So we're going to kind of stick with that concept and keep it in line or behind your single family house. For maximum height, this was one that we were kind of concerned on, where the state said the maximum height, you can't make it less than what's allowed for a single family house. So in Norwalk, in most zones, the max height for a single family house is 35 feet. So our kind of fear was you might start seeing 35-foot high accessory apartments, detached accessory apartments going up. And we were kind of, thinking that these in general are supposed to be accessory to your single family house. We already have restrictions saying it should be less than the square footage of your house. So why not also say it should probably have a lower height threshold than the single family house? And then for architectural design, so the idea with that was the state said you can't put an architectural design if you don't have one for your single family houses. We were kind of thinking, well, it should kind of resemble the neighborhood and possibly prohibit certain structures from being ADUs. We want these to actually be permanent structures on your property. We don't want to see people using RVs or trailers or anything like that as a ADU. We would prefer that they're actually structures. So given those kind of things, we technically would have to opt out if you wanted to actually say it should resemble your single family house. And then periodic renewals. This is an interesting one. We kind of do it already. To an extent, we make you file an annual affidavit if you have an ADU on your property. And essentially it just says that you still live either in the ADU or in your house. We think it's a good idea going forward to maintain that, because what our fear is that if we start, if we get rid of the home property owner residing on the property portion, You might see corporations who are already doing this with regular houses starting to buy these up, and then they have essentially 2 rent checks coming in. The goal of the ADU legislation is to increase home ownership, not to kind of detract from it. So that's kind of our fear right now. We'll see I think if we do opt out, kind of how everyone feels, I think, when it comes to public hearing time on whether we should keep that or not. And then I should have started off with this, but staff is in full agreement with allowing them in detached structures. We think that's the biggest change, and kind of the best practice going forward is to allow them in detached structures. That's something that we don't do now. So we think that's kind of the biggest change. That's why you only see 259 ADUs on the books in the last 40 years that they've been allowed. We think it's because there's been a lot of restriction, and most of that stems from it having to be attached to your house. So I sent draft regulations. Obviously, those are subject to change. I don't know if my document's not loading. Stop share and see. Put that back up.
Did you have more to show?
Yeah, I'm seeing if I could actually get this to populate.
Hey, Brian, while you're doing that, you saying this, that you talk about the consensus.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? I mean, is that
So we were discussing this with the commission for a few of their meetings. So kind of what we discussed, kind of the options with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and kind of got their feel on it. So that's kind of what I was going with that, was the idea, or kind of the thought of the commission as a collective was that. All right, and then these are the draft regulations. I don't know if you wanted to go through those, or if, these are obviously subject to change.
Yeah, if you don't mind, really quick, please.
Sure. So we start out with kind of just going through where the zones are going to be allowed. So we kept the existing standard, which is in all single family zones. And then obviously the big change is that we are going to allow them detached from the house. Some kind of just prescriptive language. So it has to be located on a lot that has a single family house on it. You're limited to only have one ADU on your property. This is highlighted because this is probably one of the more likely to change, possibly not change. That's kind of up in the air for the property owner residing on the premises. Minimum rental duration. This is in here because we don't want to see these becoming Airbnbs. We want them to actually be residences, whether it's for a young family, whether it's for your parents, your grandparents, anything like that. We don't want them to just be Airbnbs. 5 here is just existing language, just saying that you need either DPW, WPCA, or health approval, depending on your utility connections. So then we get into locations where you can put these on your property. So this is one of the reasons why we would have to opt out should you agree, which is that for a detached ADU, it cannot be located closer to the front property line than the existing single family dwelling. So technically it's a greater setback than what we would require for the house. Therefore, according to the state, we would need to opt out in order to enact that language. So this could be if your house is 40 feet off the property, your front property line, we would let you put the detached 40.1 feet back. So it's really just that idea that for houses that are further located further away from your minimum setback, that we don't want you to stick a detached one in front of it. We prefer it to the side or behind. Side and rear setback, technically, as of now, 10-foot minimum side setback would only be greater than what is required for a B residence zone, and all the other zones. This is actually less restrictive. But again, because it's more restrictive in a B zone, this would require an opt-out. attached, we kept these all as the same as your house, so there's no real big difference there. Height is one of the things that we would have to opt out should you agree that this is it's better to require them to be not as tall as a single family house. So what we did was for a detached, if you're 15 feet or less from your side or rear property line, then, or excuse me, if you're 20 feet or less from your side or rear property line, then it can only be 15 feet high. If you're 20 feet or more from your side or rear property line, then it can be 20 feet high. So you get an additional 5 feet when you get further away from your property lines. Attached, no difference. Max size, this is one where we would have to opt out, which is the 700 square feet. Design standards, another reason why we would have to opt out, which is pretty much just a statement saying that we want the ADU to be designed to look like a house. And then prohibited structures, I guess this kind of could fall into an architectural design standard, is just listing certain types of structures that we would not permit to be an ADU. Parking is the existing standard, and it's the standard that's accepted by the state, which is just one additional parking space to be required. And then procedure for approval. This is the existing standard, which is actually a bit better than what the state proposed, that these could be, you can allow these by site plan review, which would require it to go to Planning and Zoning Commission for a vote. We do these over the counter. You come in, your plan complies with our zoning code, we hand you the approval. Just the only thing is with the affidavit, each year we would require you to submit an affidavit that says that you continue to reside on the premises, should that standard remain, and that the minimum rental duration of 6 months remains.
Do you predict, a lot of applications coming in as soon as zoning approves this?
I don't think so. I mean, we've definitely seen people interested in it because of the state legislation, asking about doing them. I think we'll see a few at first, but again, these ADUs they're not cheap to build. These, you're looking at anywhere between $80,000 to $200,000 to construct these on your property. So it's not. I think some people like the idea, but when they see the cost, they're going to say, never mind. But I mean, I definitely think allowing them in detached structures is a good step forward. I think it helps with, supplementing homeowners who are, struggling to pay their mortgage. This gives them additional, income. So, I think it's overall a good thing. Just kind of a few, what I think are minor restrictions tacked on.
Okay, thank you.
And then I could go into one thing with density, and I want to hit on this, is allowing detached ADUs is not increasing density. We already allow ADUs in all the single family zones. So the density kind of already exists. The city has agreed to this density going back to when the regulation was first adopted in 1984. So we're not, by allowing them in detached structures, you are not increasing density in the city. That, that standard exists today.
Okay. Mr. Livingston.
Thanks. So Brian, unlike the prior item we voted on, these are not final regs, right? I mean, these
are drafts. So the idea, we did not, I think the commission and staff are saying we think that the state legislation is a good thing. There's just kind of those few minor things that we think are needed, the tweaks, which would require us to opt out.
But you're asking us to approve this before you guys have, so to speak.
So we're not asking you to approve this draft language. So this is kind of the idea.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just to be clear, you're asking us to approve the opt-out without us knowing exactly what the final version is going to look like.
Right.
And why is that? Why are we doing it now versus say a month from now, or what's the timing?
So I think, we have to opt out by January 1. That's the deadline. If we do not opt out, then we're opted in. And then essentially, if you opt in, you can't go back and make things more restrictive than what the state has laid out. So that's kind of the idea. And what we were hoping is that this change, the draft regs would just kind of get rolled into the rezoning as a whole.
But I guess I come back to the timing. We're opting out for something that isn't even set yet. I mean, isn't there, I mean, how do we know? I mean, listen, I support this, but I just wonder, is this premature?
Yeah, sure. So I think what we could consider doing then in that light is we put this forward before the Planning and Zoning Commission to go through the adoption of this language, and then come back to Common Council to finalize the opt-out. That's definitely an option too.
I don't know what others think, or Mr. Cadiz thinks about that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we got till January 1st. How long do you think that process would take to go through planning and zoning, the commission?
So at this point, August is probably booked up. So the earliest we'd put this on for public hearing and vote for the commission would be September. And then under that timeline, it would come back to you or the full council for either September or October.
Is there a reason we need to do it today? I mean, some benefit?
No, it's just to get the ball rolling on the opting out.
You proposing a motion, Mr. Livingston?
Well, Mr. Hooverman had his hand up. I know we wanted to comment on
I'm
that.
sorry, I can't see.
Oh, sorry, I'll stop sharing.
Mr. Hooverman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of things. First of all, if we're going to do that motion, I completely support it because I feel like we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here. I'm concerned about a few things. One of them is there's this sort of new vogue with the tiny homes, and this would preclude the idea of a tiny home unless we were putting it in as a I guess if you put it in and put it on a foundation, would that be allowed? Would a tiny home then be considered a structure and not a mobile unit being put in? Because one of your things is a prohibited structure is some sort of mobile home. I mean, you call them mobile home, travel trailers, recreational shipping containers, but tiny homes would be an option that would work, that would conform to the square footage. And this proposed zoning regulation for Norwalk doesn't allow for that, so that we eliminate that option. I also disagree with the 700. I'd like to see the 1,000 foot because I think that it's supportable. I think you're correct in saying that, you know, if you have 1,000 square foot home and the 30% on the opt out is an issue, I get that, but I think there's a happy medium in there, maybe a little more square footage, because I think 700 could potentially be very limiting. Another thing that I have is the connection to sewer and water. In this regulation, you say the WPCA and the health department has to approve. I'm not 100% certain what that approve is. Does that mean they have to pull permits and it has to be an actual tie-in to the sewer line at the main line in the house, or not the house at the street? Or are you talking about that it can be a tie-in into the existing sewer inside the home as an auxiliary tie-in that goes then to the street? Which is it? Is the water, do you have to bring a brand new water line in? Because in the opt-out in the 2129, the Public Act, it says that you can't make those distinctions, you can't make those limits. So I'm concerned about that, because that again can add a cost. I mean, I think it's a pretty heavy cost to put a brand new sewer line, especially if you're talking about a home that's way behind the setback. That's a big run and a couple $1,000 permit that you've got to pull in order to tie in to the street, as opposed to tying in at the house. So I mean, I question a couple of those things. I also question the idea of the architectural review, because you know, I think if somebody chooses to put, let's like go back to my tiny home idea. So tiny homes were acceptable. you're talking about then having to take and find one that conforms to your architecture, the architecture of the neighborhood. And I don't necessarily know that we should be that limiting about these. I think the idea of these things is fantastic. I actually feel like this regulation that you guys have written is incredibly limiting compared to what the state has done. And the state's idea is to promote the idea of this. And I feel like this is not going to promote it. This is going to limit it. So those are my thoughts on it. But I fully support if we're going to push this on. I'd like to see what the finished zoning regulation is before I say, let's not do the state regulation.
Anyone else?
No.
Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to defer consideration of this item until such time as the Planning and Zoning Commission has adopted regulations.
All in favor? Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Look forward to hearing from you on this item in hopefully September, October.
Sure. And brief pause while I kick Steve off planning and zoning and swap places with.
Chairman Kites,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
do have a question though. So, you know, we just voted on it, but once it comes back from planning and zoning, you know, what authority would we then have to make any changes or any suggestions? Do we at that point, once it comes back from planning and zoning, or
I guess
do
the
we
only
have
card
to agree or not agree?
I guess the only card we hold is not opting out
That's it.
at that point. So I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there, right?
Yeah, thank you.
If I may, I think that we probably want to meet with Steve and Brian offline and be able to talk to them a little bit more about the ADU piece and be able to make sure that Planning and Zoning Commission understands the concerns and understands the thoughts of the Common Council. I think that's a really important piece of the process here, so that when you do see what will be voted in, you feel as though you've had a chance to be able to weigh in and provide a lot of feedback on that. Obviously, that's extremely valuable, and want to make sure that that happens as part of the process.
Most definitely.
Chairman, the structure or the process is they have to go to a public hearing on this zoning regulation too before they vote on it, correct?
Following its approval, yeah, I think it's a 30-day.
Okay.
So they do it September. Yeah, so we're looking October, November.
Yeah.
Any other questions in regards to that last item? No? Okay. All right, next up, something we've been talking about for quite some time, and here it is before us, and that's item 3, authorizes Mayor Harry W. Rowland to execute any and all documentation to ratify and approve the industrial zones study. Would someone like to move that item? All right, Mr. Hewleman, thank you. Mr. Kleppen, welcome.
Good evening. How are we doing?
Good, sir.
So, industrial zones. So I had sent out staff memo, went out to you folks end of last week. I think it kind of reiterated what we had spoken about previously. And the memo tried to outline different options and paths forward for the city regarding this and changes or changes not to make. Staff recommendation isn't significantly changed. I think there are 2 options that we would recommend. One is sticking with the industrial one as initially proposed within the plan. Another option, which I think is viable and doesn't really have any negative impacts or further burdensome on any property owners, but could potentially alleviate some of the concerns expressed about the types of businesses and the traffic, you know, looking in a broader term, would to rezone it to the industrial number 2, which is the lighter of the 2 industrial zones. So that was kind of the gist of the memo in a nutshell. And again, just laid out the rationale and how we got to this point.
Yeah, I know we've I want to thank you, Steve, for that meeting we had a couple weeks back now. Discussed this at length in caucus and offline and so forth. I know concern of many was the new school, South Norwalk School, and how to better accommodate the students and walkability and so forth. We had a discussion that addressed the long-term issue and then the short term, which we had ideas such as working group, getting folks together and keeping this going throughout this project. So we've had it was working with the local businesses and to talk about buffers and such things. So I guess I'll just open it up to questions. We've been down this long road. Anyone have anything to add or ask? Mr. Livingston?
I'll just add, I support, sort of the lighter industrial, whatever. I don't know if we have to do anything separate on that, Steve, in terms of what we approve. I mean, you said, I don't, in your memo, you're saying alternate option is a down zone. The number 2, which is less intensive, I would support that. And maybe you can just highlight the differences between 1 and 2.
Sure. If you give me a second, I could probably pull up a document that indicates that. I would say if that's your preference, then I would include that in any resolution that you pass. So that way it's passed on. Obviously I'll indicate that to the Planning and Zoning Commission when they get towards their adoption phase, but I would recommend putting it in your resolution as well.
I too support the lighter use if we're taking a straw poll.
So I have a question, Steve. So I see under the non-conformities, when you have the site plan I-1 and then on the proposed I-1, that's not I-2? Am I not?
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
So I don't know what page it's on, but under non-conformities, eminent domain, you have the site plan uses currently allowed under I-1. Are we changing anything to I-2?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah, so let me pull up a map, or maybe the memo. Would it be easier, the memo I sent to
No, I think
reference
the
that?
memo doesn't do I-2, just as I-1.
Right, but it talks about, there's a map in there that I think Ms. Young was referring to that had the parcels identified that would become non-conforming. Is that what?
No, I think what you actually have listed. So it still is identifying the area as I-1. So what's listed under I-1 site plan uses proposed, is that actually I-2 or I-1?
No, sir, everything that was in the memo was referencing I-1 currently, but the idea would be if you move that stretch of properties from I-1 to I-2, you would increase a few of the non-conformities on the properties, but it's not significant. And again, keep in mind that stretch of Meadow Street we're talking about is there's half a dozen parcels. They're good sized parcels, but it's not a large stretch of road.
Yeah, Darlene, that's what I was looking to see, is what the I-2 items are.
I mean, I think that's helpful because I don't know. I would like to know what they are, what the recommendation is.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
I have an odd question, Steve. In I-2, it says you've got a language change here in 2G, offices including medical offices, and then you add provided they are not located on the ground floor of any building. Why is that changed to eliminate any office from the ground floor?
That's a good question and probably is, I think the intent is for either the industrial 1 or industrial 2 zone is for the office to be kind of accessory to the principal use.
Well,
But,
no, this
I
is
mean-
this is in I-2, your I-2 regulations.
Right, you're talking about G. Can you guys see my screen? I think I have it up.
Yeah, I see it now. It's right there. It's G.
Yeah, and again, that probably was the initial intent, but that language, I think, could be removed if that was something that was, an issue as well. I don't think that's, make or break on any of the proposal. Did you want me to scroll down at all, Darlene, to go through these a little more?
Please.
Sure, so I'll start at the beginning so you can kind of see.
Well, Steve, do you have something that, like, you gave a chart in the memo, and I wonder if you had something similar we can just look at, as opposed to sort of,
To compare the changes.
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Do you want to change from I1 to I2?
Yeah, that's what I was asking for. I don't know, Darlene, I think that's.
Yeah,
you
that's what
wanted
I,
to.
yeah, that's it.
Okay, yeah, that's probably in a prior memo, but I just got to dig that out. So just give me a few minutes. If you have any other questions, I can field those while I'm digging that out.
So then on the map that's in your memo, all of that would instead become I2, all of the green, the purple, and the yellow lines.
Correct.
So we're saying all of that would be I2.
Right.
Okay.
What
So
other areas in
how
South
much-
Norwalk are I1?
Currently or proposed?
Both.
So currently, well, obviously, right now, the large areas we're talking about where the proposed school site is, where the properties on Meadow Street are, that's all I1. So that whole stretch is industrial 1. I can pull up, I did find that memo. So if you want to look at that, we can do that, or I could jump to the map. Just tell me which way you'd like to go.
Well, we can do the I1, the comparison, if you pulled it up.
Okay. So it's not unfortunately, this memo was not side by side, but it does show the I1, I2 changes, and it's not matched up perfectly, but it does indicate that. Let me shrink it a little bit.
So the column on the right is actually I2. It says I1. That's what I
Yeah.
think is confusing us.
No, that's it's labeled correctly.
I think so. We have this.
Yeah. So maybe you can just put up I2 and we can compare it to our memo.
Okay, so you should have both of these previously. So do you want me to pull the I2 back up?
Please.
Yeah, you had the I2 as a hot link in the memo. If you click on it, it'll pull it up.
Okay, so here's I2 again.
And Steve, off the top of your head, can you just, I'm sure you're familiar with the differences. Can you kind of just tell us?
Sure. So the main differences between the two are the one was the contractor yards are no longer an allowed use in the I2 zone. So those would be only permitted in I1 by special permit, where right now they're site plan use in I1. So that's one significant use. There are some of the uses that are currently allowed in I1 were pulled out completely, like the junkyards, those kind of things. Indoor contracted facilities would not be a permitted use as well. So it's meant to be geared towards a less intensive use overall. We do allow, at least currently as proposed, does allow for the parking of commercial vehicles. So that's something that was considered, and I know there's been some discussion about that. It does allow residential uses. It's trying to do uses such as residential, which are accessory to and supportive of the underlying commercial use. So it helps offset the cost and monetize the property. So that's kind of the intent of the zone itself. For special permit uses, these are listed here, and some of these are, are carryover items. But it does allow, again, larger commercial vehicle storage, but that's by special permit. And as we discussed, the special permit has additional standards and additional criteria that the applicant needs to meet in order to gain approval. Yeah, so that's it. And I think self-storage was pulled out. Also, distribution facilities, which obviously would be a large traffic generator, was pulled out as well. So that's no longer permitted in the I-2. So I think the gist of it is several of those Meadow Street parcels would increase in nonconformity. I can pull that map up if that's helpful as well.
Yes, please.
Steve, while you're doing that, the commercial recreation establishments have been taken out. So I assume that means that the places on Martin Luther King are now non-conforming or would be non-conforming.
Right, and I think, and I obviously wasn't here when that particular use was approved for the zone, but I think that that's, in terms of the intent of what the plan is trying to achieve in terms of job retention, job growth, those are not the best uses of those property. So I think that's a little bit of the rationale behind why those changes are recommended.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I was just curious about that.
I think you mentioned jobs, and I think that's been asked or questioned a couple of times. So has Utile, maybe they have sent it, been able to extract how many jobs we are actually providing with these different types of businesses in the area? Because we keep saying that.
Yeah, and again, that's I'm trying to locate the memo, and it's not where I thought it was. So just give me a little bit of time. The plan itself, and I think I had some of that material in the last memo I sent. It's a hypothetical exercise. So what they did was they looked at a couple properties in the area existing, looked at the uses of the property were there from the available data they had in terms of listings of the businesses and the jobs that are accompanying those businesses. And then they modeled build out based on the new regulations and the new uses allowed. And the conclusion was, for the most part, the potential is for significant increase in, jobs per site. But, again, there's what we tried to highlight in the memo is that there's a lot of things that go into attracting that business to the city. It's not just a simple matter of rezoning it. We have to try to attract those businesses to this location, make it known that, this is what's the city's desire for this area is versus what's there. And then again, there's got to be available property for someone to build that. There needs to be, a market, and there needs to be a willing seller of that property and then a willing buyer to realize that.
But the current status of employment, as we keep saying, that, that a lot of these contractor yards or small businesses in the area provide so many jobs. And it would be good to know exactly what that looks like right now.
Yeah, and if I could find that memo, it's got that in there for those Meadow Street properties, just based, and I have to, preface that by saying it's based on the data available. So we didn't have the opportunity to, go and call these individual businesses and say, hey, can you verify your employment numbers? And a part of me was a little bit uncomfortable with doing that just based on the fact that we're talking about rezoning their property and then at the same time potentially making their businesses non-conforming. So that was kind of why we didn't necessarily follow up on a one-on-one basis on these businesses. Sorry, I'm having trouble just locating the memo.
While you're doing that, Steve, it seems like the consensus is, especially specifically to Meadow Street, that it be recommended that it move to I-2. versus the current recommendation of I1. I'm just thinking about process. I think just to be safe is to call for a vote to the amendment to add that recommendation in and include that.
So if we change Meadow Street specifically to I2, how does that impact the other zoning in South Norwalk, the properties? So how many other areas would allow I1 types of businesses?
Sure, that map I can pull up, so just give me a second.
Because I think that if we're doing this, I asked that question because then it leads me to, you know, what were the real expectations for this industrial study? Particularly since South Norwalk is an area that had several different types of designated zoning regs, right? I mean, I think there were several different properties that were identified in different ways through zoning.
Can you guys see, this is an older map, but it's, well, I think for discussion purposes, it can answer Darlene's questions. So the map on the left side shows the proposed zoning, and this is what came out of the study for the most part, with some tweaks after the fact. So what the stretch of area we're talking about was basically from, you know, Meadow Street, this piece through here, and obviously here is the school site, which is also was proposed initially for I1. So the remaining I1 areas, and again, we should clarify or clarify your recommendation of how far south you want to go, and then again, how far to the east. I mean, this lighter color, you know, I don't know if it's periwinkle or whatever you want to call it, on the east side of things is initially proposed for the I2. The stretch of properties we're talking about now, which is through here, was proposed for I1, and based on the conversations that, you know, and recommendations I think you just discussed, was making this also I2. So, I mean, to me, it wouldn't make sense to just do the properties that were immediately abutting Meadow Street. You would also probably carry that back all the way to, you know, to match these two up. So you don't have this little I1 pocket in between the two I2 areas. And that wouldn't, you know, make too much sense to me. So the question is, you know, you have these two properties on, you know, on the other side of the street from the school, which are proposed for, you know, currently I1 and are proposed to recommend I1. Those right now have two very large kind of warehouse manufacturing office buildings on them. So you know, that use would remain. And then the other area proposed for I1 that's in South Norwalk is off of Rockland Road, which right now currently has a whole bunch of different heavy uses and contractor yards on it, with very little impact on residential areas. So we felt that was appropriate. The other areas that are currently I1, which we've proposed to change to I2, are along Boughton Street. We've talked about that quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So you have the self-storage area down through here, and then predominantly contractor material yards to the north and a little bit also to the south. So the plan recommendation was to down zone those from I1 to I2. That area in particular, the consultant flagged early on because they said, wait a minute, there's a lot of, you know, a lot of trucks going in and out, and that Boughton Street is a really narrow road. And they felt that, you know, having the contractor yards on there just compounded that situation. So their recommendation was I2, which we agreed with through the process and moved that forward. There were also some areas, little cleanup areas through Lexington Avenue and so forth, that we've removed the I1 designations and made those either going to like a neighborhood business, which is much lower scale, or to residential.
Hey, Steve, By the school site, and so across the street is Wusthof, I believe. Would that be conforming to I-2?
Sorry, my dog is deciding to bark at the same time. I'd have to look at the building itself. I think the use part is okay, but the building, the I-2 and I-1 standards are a little different on the bulk and height, so I'd have to double check to make sure they were the same.
Yeah, it just seems to me, and I don't know what the implications are, that if we're doing Meadow Street because we're concerned about the school, why wouldn't we do all this I-1 area right there of the school? Make it all I-2. You asked how far down you go, and I'm saying, you know, why would you stop next to the school, which is the part we're really concerned about, or one of the things we're concerned about.
So Tom, what you're saying is actually where like Wusthof is 355 Wilson, that's across the street. That would be, you'd want to basically make all the dark purple light purple.
Yeah, on that area. I mean, just saying logically, if we're concerned about the school, why wouldn't we downgrade the parcels right next to the school?
I agree with that. My question is what's left for heavy industrial then?
Yeah, no, that's,
City
yeah,
of
I agree.
Norwalk?
What are the implications of doing that?
What's the
The
implication?
bigger
of-
question has to
because
be, though, the community has been living with these conditions for decades. And so how do we make those changes? It's not just about Meadow Street and the school. This South Norwalk community has lived under these conditions for a very long time. And it sounds as if the changes were limited to the amount of changes that we can make. I mean, I know we're talking about the school, and that's important. It's very important. But where folks live outside of that school too is an issue too. South Norwalk has been the industrial site for the city.
Where else in the city is I-1? Steve?
Right now, the only other areas are along the East Avenue. Yeah, so there's nothing north of 95. The only other areas are really along East Ave. Right, and basically it
Oh, down by the
parallels the train
transfer,
station.
near the transfer station.
Yeah, along
Over
the
there,
water
Harbor Avenue.
and then along the tracks.
Okay.
I don't
I'm
have
sorry,
that.
David, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Your point, Darlene, is absolutely taken. I agree with you. I just was curious as to kind of where it leaves us. One of the things Steve mentions in his memo is, ensure that there's adequate land left for future economic growth in the city. And that, I just want to know where we still have areas that we can look at that type of development.
And it looks like the properties in South Norwalk, because you can have a home and in your backyard, turn it into a contractor yard. So
Yeah.
It almost feels like essentially all of South Norwalk could be turned, transformed into something. And it's happening. It's happened. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no regulation to it. And that's an issue. And at our last meeting talking about this, and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded as if we don't have much authority to get some of these properties who haven't put up the proper barriers, or what do we call them? I can't think of the name of the word, is it barriers, buffers. And we can't force anybody to do anything. We can't. Am I right, Steve?
Well, I mean, there's a few things there. One, that in the memo, it lays out the changes made per the proposed zoning. There's a pretty significant reduction in the amount of industrial land alone, whether it's I-1 or I-2 within South Norwalk alone. So there is a big change there. I mean, I think what we're trying to do is strike a balance between, rectifying some past wrongs with also making sure that the city has the land necessary to carry out essential services and have potential places for employment. Whether, I think if you're in agreement with the proposed types of businesses that the I2 zone seeks to gain in the area, then I think those are less conflicting with residential uses and neighborhood use overall. You know, we can't completely eliminate truck traffic. I mean, and with the way our economy shifted to, you know, deliveries and everything's mobile now, it's hard to completely eliminate that from things. The other part that you asked about, Darlene, is if any of these businesses that are legally there operating today, so regardless of whether it's a contractor yard, transfer station, a metal scrap yard, we can change the zoning to whatever we want. We can make it a single family zone. They're still allowed to legally operate in perpetuity, whether they change hands, you know, it's a different family. They change it from Fred scrapyard to Bob scrapyard. That doesn't change their legal right to maintain that use on that property, but it kind of freezes them in place over time. The intent of the rezoning is to offer some different uses and different incentives to do something that's different on the property for the betterment of the area and to reduce conflict.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when I go back to the proposed I2 plan, commercial vehicle storage, indoor contractor facility, what's an example of those two?
So indoor contractor facility is basically a place, you know, it could be like a Butler building or a building built that they keep all the equipment they're utilizing for whatever they're using inside the building, so you don't see it. But it's, you know, the trucks, I won't try to sugarcoat it. The trucks have to get to these sites from the property, so the vehicles are still on the road in some form or fashion, but they're not stored outside. The vehicle storage is, you know, it's a place where they can park their vehicles. They can't do the earth processing, which is, I think, the biggest issue for the area in terms of the noise and the dust, because that's what usually for us gets the most calls. So that piece of that puzzle is eliminated in the I2 parcels.
But it's on here under I2.
Right, it's proposed to park the vehicles, but they can't have 20-foot high piles of dirt and have a machine sitting on top and sorting and screening all day. That's no longer allowed in I2.
And so for a commercial vehicle storage, would there be a limitation on the number of vehicles and the types of vehicles and the noise that those vehicles make?
So the noise would be bound by the noise ordinance. If it was something that went to the commission, they have in the past with applications, they have the ability to regulate the type of backup alarm system they use, as opposed to the loud piercing beep, beep, beep sound. There's that low kind of muffled warning that's, I believe, an OSHA approved opportunity. So that's something else the commission could require as part of those applications. But the number of vehicles would be restricted by the area they need for parking, and then the other area they need for any kind of buffering or landscaping. So the other portions of the site would be available to park the vehicles.
You have municipal sewage as a possible usage?
That's in the I1 zone right now. So the wastewater treatment plant is in the I1 zone. It's pretty unlikely that they put the municipal sewage on Meadow Street. I mean, you can never say never, but I think it's pretty.
And so what's I mean, it's probably self-explanatory, but a concrete plant?
That would be like Divine Brothers, who's on also in the north end of the Norwalk River up by Wall Street.
Mm-hmm. So that would be a use. Do we have something similar like that?
I believe that's the only one in the city. I mean, something else to keep in mind, and I know you may not like it, but I think some of these are essential services for the area. You need to have abilities for contractors to access materials, goods, and things for construction. So that that's all needed. Does it say that we need to have it everywhere? No, that's a different point,
But the only other place is the one you just said by, off of what, Commerce, right?
yeah, just off Commerce, correct.
And so if that one were to shift, it would come back, it would come over to South Norwalk. It could possibly relocate to South Norwalk.
Right, they could do that today. So that's something that we've found to be a use that, you know, based on our analysis, that's essential and appropriate in the industrial 1 zone.
That's industrial 1, correct?
Correct.
If we go I-2 on that Meadow Street, that couldn't shift over to.
I'd have to double check to make sure it wasn't listed with the I2 uses. I don't believe so.
I don't see
That's
that.
what I'm seeing here. I'm looking on this piece of this information where you have I-1 special permit proposed.
Right, I1, but not I2.
It's not I-2?
I believe the direction that you guys are going was that Meadow Street piece to rezone that entire area to the I1, or your recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission was to move that from the I1 to the I2.
This is under special permit proposed. So none of these things in the packet that we got listed under I1 special permit proposed are actually going to have or can take place or permissible.
They'd be permissible in the I1 zone, not in the I2.
I'm not sure what the comparison is here then. Okay.
So here, just so we're all looking at the same thing, here's the proposed I2 allowed uses, and I'll just move down.
Under special permit.
I'll get down. These are the site plan ones. Special permit, animal care center, commercial vehicle storage. There was a historic preservation clause, municipal utility plant, and a warehouse. That's I2. So again, just to be clear, that the initial proposal was for the Meadow Street parcels to be I1. The revised recommendation that I'm hearing from you folks is to consider that stretch of Meadow Street as for I2 versus I1, which, so that your example, Darlene, the concrete plant wouldn't be an allowed special permit use in the lighter of the 2 industrial zones.
Okay. So this listing in the material, the packet, I don't have to look at, is what you're saying. This, what you're showing here is.
Now that's just I1 in the packet.
Yeah, it wouldn't be if the recommendation is to take that piece of Meadow Street and put it in the I2, then the I1 uses wouldn't, really be applicable.
Hey, Steve, did the consultants take another look at the proposed area around Meadow Street once they knew there was a school going in there?
We had a meeting and talked about that, and just to kind of hear the concerns, and they kind of came down with some of the thinking that I laid out in the memo in terms of why they feel it's important to maintain those commercial uses. They are supportive of the downzoning to the I2 versus the I1. They think that can still achieve the planned goals, and then also lessen some of the impacts and burdens on the neighborhood and where the school is going to be located.
And did they specify how far that would go? The question you asked us in terms of, does it include the property across the school?
No, we didn't get into that specifically because the focus of the conversation was on that stretch of Meadow Street. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you look again, and I know anything can happen, so you probably have to consider all eventualities. But those 2 large properties just to the south of the school, based on, I think, the likelihood of somebody putting a scrap yard there or a large contractor yard there versus the value of the property with those buildings and other uses that could go there is pretty slim. But again, I mean, I don't want to hold everything up over a couple of parcels.
Tom, are you done?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, just to keep this moving, it sounds like we're, I don't speak for everyone, but it sounds like we're all in agreement for changing that zoning from I1 I-1 to at least I-2. Personally, I don't feel comfortable with doing the west side of Upper Wilson. I think knowing the layout, the setback there, and to your points, Steve, I don't know what the rest of the group thinks, but I do think that if something's going to be changed and recommended tonight, all of Meadow Street, including the back parcels and the east side of Upper Wilson, to kind of keep that continuous flow. Just, I guess, let's speak freely. Is everyone amicable to that change?
John, just so I understand it, so you would not include the Wusthof property?
I would not. I don't. I think knowing where the traffic flow is coming from, the pedestrian traffic, no one's coming that direction. I think knowing the building, knowing how far it's set back, like to Steve's point, the value of the property, I don't know. I just personally, I mean, but also, I don't know, Steve, you said that you're not sure if by changing to I-1 to I-2, that would that be a non-conforming use, the current use? You didn't have an answer to that question, correct, Steve?
I don't think the use is the issue. I just, the building itself, because there are some differences between how big the building can be between I-1 and I-2, and I don't know what the size of those buildings are. I don't think that's a big concern either way. And the use of manufacturing or warehouse, I think would be compatible either way, or it could be something worked out in the future. I'm not.
So I guess let me ask you this, Steve. I mean, just speaking freely, I mean, would you what I just said and what we're proposing amending, what are your thoughts on also changing the west side of Upper Wilson to I-2?
Right. So just so everybody's clear, that we're talking about really these two pieces here.
Correct.
And one is the old community college, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Wusthof, and right there is the community college building.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about the differences between the I-1 proposed and the I-2 proposed. What Darlene was getting at with some of those uses, like concrete plant or metal scrapyard or sewage facility, you know, they're probably not things you want here, regardless of whether the school's proposed there or not. So, I mean, if the proposal was to make this all I-2 through this whole stretch through here, I don't think that creates any undue burden or hardship on anybody. I think hopefully the I-2 changes proposed are enough where the property owners or somebody looking to develop that type of use would find the proposed changes valuable.
Yeah, well, you sold me on that, Steve. So it looks like, I mean, I guess
I definitely, I'm sorry, John.
No, I mean, go ahead, Tom. Are you agreeing with Steve?
Yeah,
now?
I do agree, because I think while right now we're all kind of okay with it, we don't know what the future holds. And if we can make the change now and not have any real detrimental effect to anybody, we should do it, I think.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm on board too.
Yeah, my guess, just and it's not necessarily your problem per se. It becomes a planning and zoning staff and commission problem down the road when we go to do the actual public hearing on the changes. That I know there's already property owners, you know, contractors are not happy about some of the changes we're making. They don't want to become non-conforming. They don't want the zone changed. My guess would be some other property owners may not like to go from I-1 to I-2 if they're not contractor units, but that's not necessarily the end of the world. You know, again, they can continue to operate as they are today.
Just a quick question. First off, I support all of that simply because of what Darlene said earlier. I mean, you could move, Divine Brothers could move there if you leave it as I-1, and I don't think you want that. But Tom mentioned something earlier about the proposed school property going to I-2. Does that change what we can, like, building size on that for the school? That doesn't put us in a situation that we're not anticipating.
So I think we looked at this early on. The I-2 zone is a little more liberal in terms of what's allowed for the height. So the idea that, sorry, so the school might actually, from a zoning, just bulk and height standard, fit better into the I2 zone. But at the same time, there are some changes proposed. I know we're working with Board of Ed right now for the high school on some language for the zoning text to try to make it a little easier for the schools to get into some of these properties, because we had issues with one of the prior applications where there was a pretty onerous setback based on the existing language in the zoning text. So I'm pretty confident that whatever we need to do to get this school in there, that the zoning won't be an obstacle, whether it's I2 or the changing it, which we talked about, making this whole thing residential consistent all the way up.
Well, it's a question, because I hate to see us, we're moving that down the, that cart up the hill as well, and find out that we made the hill bigger, and that would be bad. So thanks.
Okay. That being said, sorry, I'm off camera for a minute. So I will propose the amendments that all properties surrounding the new South Norwalk School, which include the west and east of Upper Wilson, Meadow Street, and the school property itself, let it be recommended industrial zone study to be I2 zone. All in favor? Okay, unanimous. Okay, before I call for a vote on the item as amended, any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of voting for the item as amended, please raise your hand and signify yes. Opposed? Abstention? Darlene, are you abstaining? Yes, no?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Were you in favor of the item as amended?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry.
But that wasn't the actual item, was it?
Yes, ma'am. That was, I took a
It said
second vote.
authorize the mayor, was that it?
Yeah, the item as amended. You voted yes on the amendment, and now on the item as amended.
Yeah, okay. I reluctantly vote yes, because our focus right now is on that area, but the industrial study itself was for the entire city. And there's still real issues outside of that area for residents. But it's a start. Hopefully things won't get worse and will get better over time, but I'm concerned. And I'm concerned that not enough was actually looked at in terms of making real changes for the folks who live in South Norwalk. I have 4 contractor yards outside of my window every day. Every single day, I listen to that noise, and I'm not the only one. So to say that, yes, we're okay with this, I am for the school, but the impact on residents in South Norwalk is not going to change. It's significant. And I question this whole process of going through it. I mean, we had to. I'm glad we did, because who knew we were going to have a school in the area right now? But South Norwalk still is, ends up on the short end of the stick, and things don't change until developers come in or someone else comes in to do something. And when that happens, that means the area is gentrified. So, we're between a rock and a hard place. And it's not a comfortable place to be when you have to live in those conditions every day. I drive it every day. I see it every day. People don't complain about it because they become complacent and they feel like they can't change it. But I know it's a balance between business, having to have this, these types of businesses in Norwalk. But I don't know if anybody in South Norwalk right now is going to see any real impact from this anytime soon, because those businesses that are there are going to stay there, right? They're grandfathered in, they will be there. So
Thank you,
that's
Sam.
where we are.
All right, thank you, Darlene. And thank you all. The motion passes unanimously. And yeah, thank you, Steve. I know it's been a long road traveled. You still got a ways to go. All right, seeing no other business and knowing we're gonna have a long meeting in August, I will call for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. All in favor? Unanimous. All right, everyone, have a great night.
You too. Good night.